Yeah, g'day YouTubers. Tinker O'Toole with another video. Today we're going to talk about hand filing, but we're going to go over a lot of the technical issues associated with hand filing rather than a filing demonstration. I've got plenty of filing demonstrations, and if you're looking for those in Google, just type chainsaw users dash filing and you should be able to bring up a lot of my filing videos. So I just want to talk about techniques used in hand filing, a lot of the mistakes that people make and how you can avoid those mistakes. So let's get right into the mistake problem, and we need to go back we'll go back to 1991 when Still recommended the 10 degrees downward tilt. They no longer do recommend it, and Still recommended that you hold your file 1/10 above the top of the tooth. And we can put a picture up that illustrates that, and that's out of the bar and chain manual, and you can see clearly that they're holding at 10 degrees downward tilt, and there's a bit of text in there and a bit of a description about what's going on. So clearly back in those days they were doing 10 degrees downward tilt for RS and RM chain. Isn't that interesting? And they were holding the file only 1/10 of its diameter above the top of the tooth. Now, back in those days, if you held the file 1/10 of the diameter above the top of the tooth, you were more subject to getting a little bit of hook. And we can put a picture up of a tooth that's got a little bit too much hook. So if you've got a little bit too much hook, the recommendation was that you tilt your file down 10 degrees. By tilting it down 10 degrees, the file would be more on an uphill and it would start to file the point. And you would eliminate, hopefully, that too much hook. Too much hook can weaken the front of a full chisel chain. Now, the easiest chain to file is your semi-chisel tooth. Semi-chisel cuts about 10% slower, but it is so easy to file semi-chisel. It's just a matter of holding the file horizontal with the tooth. Semi-chisel has that nice rounded working corner, which is much more forgiving in a dirty environment. And all we're worried about is this compounded bevel angle, this other angle that comes off the top plate, right? And that's referred to as top plate cutting angle. So this sharp edge here is what we need to get razor sharp, as well as the working corner and down on the side plate. So on semi-chisel, the top plates are flat and you hold your file flat. Now, one thing about hand filing, people are going to stuff it up no matter what they're doing. If you stuff it up and it all gets out of whack, do yourself a favour, get one of these file holders. It's even got the marks on it for the 30 degrees left and right, so that the file is held at the right position. Now, sometime after, before the year 2000, I don't know the exact date, Still recommended, they've gone from their 10% above the diameter of the file, and they've doubled it to 20%, 1/5 of the diameter now is to be held above the file. That was somewhere around the year 2000. I can't remember the exact date that came in, but yeah, sometime after 2000. Only a couple of years ago, they decided that that wasn't enough and people were still making mistakes, and they changed it 1/4 of the diameter. We just put a slide up there of when they recommended 1/10. So that's going back quite a long time ago. And these days we'll put another slide up where they're recommending 1/4. So, you know, isn't that amazing? We've gone from 1/10 of the diameter to 1/4. If you're holding your file 1/4 of its diameter above the top of the tooth, you should not be getting any problems with any hook whatsoever, right? So that's the latest, and Oregon and other companies don't recommend 25% of the diameter. They reckon 20% is good enough of the diameter to be held above the top of the tooth. Okay, so semi-chisel, there's only 3 angles that you'll ever really come across, and that's the top plate angle, that's that angle there. And when we spoke about that compounded beveled angle, that's that angle there, right across here, this face here, that's your second angle, and your top plate, or your side plate, sorry, your side plate angle, which is about there where my fingernail is, which is generally about 70 degrees on a semi-chisel. They're the only 3 angles that you need to worry about. If you hold your file at that specified 20 to 25% above the top of the tooth, you'll get those angles. Okay, now it starts to get a little bit more complicated when you go into full chisel and you're liable to run into more problems. So the beginner should stick with the semi-chisel until he becomes really good at hand filing, and then he can start to file his full chisel. And there's a few things that you need to be made aware of. One thing about hand filing, especially on full chisel, there's a few more angles incorporated into that. And at the factory, it's what we refer to as multi-axis technology. And what that actually means is that the machines that grind your teeth, cutters, chains, they're all ground on a machine that has multi-axis. You've got angles coming in from everywhere. You've got a couple of angles that are built in that you can't do anything about. I've got a list of 10 different angles, and I'll go over them, and you'll be surprised what angles are there, and then we'll go over the angles that you need to be aware of. So the first angle is our top plate, which is that angle there, and it's normally, when you hold your file, we're looking at 30 degrees. The compounded bevel angle on the face, if you're holding your file at the correct angle, that's a top plate cutting angle, comes in roughly about 60 degrees. So that's our second angle there. Our third angle is the side plate angle, and that's roughly where my fingernail is, right? And the side plate, let's say it's 60 degrees. Then on the opposite side of the tooth, you can have a different angle from this side to that side. Depends on how you hold your file or how it was ground at the factory. So that's number 4, the opposite side of the side plate. Okay, number 5 is your profile on the side plate from the gullet right up to this part here, this section here. It should be a C shape, but on Stills RS, it's a little bit different. We can look at that later. The gullet has a little bit of a inward slope like that, a bit of a slope there, right? So that's another angle there. The top plate can be horizontal on full chisel, or it can be tilted on an angle. We'll go over that. So that's another one. The top plate has also got a backward slope, as you can see, about 10 degrees. The top plate also has a taper. It's wider at the front and it's narrower at the back. All right. So also the side plate is generally not vertical. It's usually facing on an inward angle a little bit. So that's another one. There is another angle, but we won't go into that. And that is the angles that are underneath here, right? That's not that important anyway. So there's quite a lot of angles on here. So, okay, now we come to the interesting part. The same angles, all we're really interested in is that 30-degree top plate angle, filing angle, right? That's a 30-degree filing angle that we're interested in, provided that you hold your file 20 to 25% above the top of the tooth. You'll end up with a 60-degree top plate cutting angle. Those type of angles are going to get you out of trouble, whether it's semi-chisel or full chisel chains, right? I'm not going to talk about other angles. Those 2 angles are the most important for softwood, hardwood, medium wood. Get you out of trouble. The next angle is the one that's got a lot of controversy, and that's the 10 degrees downward tilt. Still no longer recommended. Oregon recommended, Carlton recommended. Why is it that still no longer recommended when it's built into the chain? And what do I mean by built into the chain? Well, let's put a slide up of Stills RS. And on this particular slide, you can see the side of the tooth, right? And I spoke about before of the side plate, how it doesn't have the typical C shape. So looking at this slide here on Stills RS, you can see that in the midsection of the side plate, it tilts forward a little bit, and then going up to the point of the tooth, it becomes very pointy. And that's typically like a lowercase R shape. Then if we go to the right side, you'll see where I've got a picture there where the top plates are facing inwards, downward slope of the top plate. Normally you won't find a word for this, but if you look at most full chisel chains, you'll see some degree of an inward slope. I do have a picture of one that's dead flat, and we'll just put that up. You can actually see where, if I hold the file, you can clearly see that that top plate is flat, all right? I do have another picture where we're filing Stills RS, and we'll put a picture up of that, and you can clearly see that it's on an angle. So with the manufacturers currently out there today, some are recommending the 10 degrees downward tilt, some are not, right? My best advice that I can give you, and that goes with steel chains or any other chain for that matter, is that if we hold a tooth like this, right, I'll zoom in there, get in focus, that you hold your file at the same, on the same plane as what the full chisel tooth is, right? So if the full chisel tooth is horizontal, hold your file. Hold your file depending on the tilt. So if your tooth is like Stills RS and it's got a tilt like that, file it. Because what you're going to do is uniformly file that working edge, that sharp edge that's on the full chisel. If you file that, you'll end up with an even degree top plate cutting angle on this side, and on this side the same angle. It'll be uniform all the way across. So that's my best advice. You look at the tooth from the nose bar and ascertain whether it's got a little bit of slope in it. And if it's got a little bit of slope in it, then you file it according to that slope. When I did measure Stills RS, it's approximately around 6 or 7 degrees of inward sloping. That inward sloping of the top plate is not something that you can find much information about. But with Stills RS, that's their most aggressive chain. There's Stills RS Pro as well. All those angles that we spoke about before still use 30 degrees on everything. The top plate cutting angle, they use 50 degrees. And as you can see with those tooth sloping inwards towards each other, it makes this a very aggressive chain. And the whole idea is that it gets that working corner into the wood first. That's the first thing that's going to hit the wood, that working corner. And it's important that it's really sharp. And with Stills RS, and we'll put another picture up, and when you have a look at that profile on the side plate leans forwards a little bit. It goes up to the little R, lowercase r shape. There's plenty of metal underneath the support. But unfortunately, that's made on a machine at the factory, which is multi-axis technology, meaning that there's many angles that are all inbuilt into the one chain or the tooth, right? Multiple angles all intersecting, some not, some are fixed. So these machines are very complicated, and when we talk about the multi-axis technology, we're talking about one pass to create all those angles in one hit, right? So yeah, very complicated pieces of equipment these days to do that. What I'm seeing a lot on your full chisel chains, and we can put another slide up of Husqvarna's C85 X-Cut, and you're going to see The same sort of thing. The side plate profile is different than your standard C shape. This C85 X-Cut is totally different than Still's RS because on the side plate, on the RS, in the midsection, it was almost vertical, about 85 degrees. This is 85 degrees, but sloping back to the left-hand side where Still's RS sloped forwards on the right-hand side. And you can see that there's more of a point on the Husqvarna C85 X-Cut, and the point's a lot longer. Yeah, so it's a different type of style. It's 40 degrees on that angle. So if you've got a grinder, you'll set it up to 40 degrees. If you've got a file, you're going to ruin that shape. Still's RS and Husqvarna's X-Cut and a lot of the Oregon style chains that have this little sharp point and a different profile on the C shape, rather than the C shape, it has more of a straight profile on that midsection of the side plate. All these type of chains that I'm seeing coming out with this type of profile are best done on a grinder because you can profile the grinding wheel. Can't profile a round file. A round file is going to leave a partial C shape, and that's about the best you're going to get out of a file, right? You can't change that circular shape, but you can change the shape on a grinding wheel. How much difference is there? So that's the real question now, right? How much difference is there between using a grinder that you can profile the shape and using a file where you can't? Well, if we say before that semi-chisel is about 10% slower than full chisel, and Husqvarna C85 X-Cut and Still's Hexa are even faster than normal full chisel, if you use a file and you eliminate those little points in that and you don't get it 100% right, your cutting performance may only drop off 2-3%, which you're not even going to notice. But nonetheless, these profiles are designed for 100% cutting optimal performance based on the design of the tooth, the geometry, and the way that they're sharpened. Yeah, the multi-access technology, big buzzword now that Oregon are using. So the 10 degrees downward tilt, my final advice is use it depending on the tilt of the top plate on the full chisel. Just follow that angle and you can't go wrong, right? And as I said, I believe personally that the reason that still no longer recommend the 10 degrees downward tilt is because people stuff it up. An example is if we're holding the file at horizontal, right? What's 10 degrees downward tilt? At best, it's a guess. So I'm going to guess 10 degrees downward tilt's something like that, right? So what I can do is take a snapshot of that. And we'll see how accurate I am. Look, I might be a degree off or something like that. I'm not going to be too far off. But some people end up filing the tie straps and they could be 15 degrees. In the situation that if you use 10 degrees downward tilt incorrectly, you can find out that you can blunten your chain. How do you blunten it? Because you put the wrong edge on that leading edge of the top plate and you take the point right off and it no longer cuts. A full chisel chain must have a nice sharp working point, right? Where the top plate and the side plate intersect at that point. This point must be a defined point and it must be sharp. The whole leading edge must be razor sharp and the whole side plate profile must be sharp. And one way to test is that your finger should catch on that point. If your finger doesn't catch on that point of the tooth, then it's not sharp enough. You haven't sharpened it properly. That's my best advice without doing a demonstration on how to file. Just remember, if you're filing full chisel chain, just follow the, sorry, there's wrong tooth. This is the full chisel. Full chisel chain, follow the top plate profile. If it leans in, tilt your file on how much that it leans in. On your semi-chisel, all semi-chisel chains have a flat top plate, and that means that you hold the file always flat. But interesting when you go back and look at that slide, and we'll just put it up one more time from still, where it actually tells you to use 10 degrees downward tilt on still's RM chain and RS chain. So that was the thought back in the day, all right? Things have changed quite a lot 30-something years ago. And as I say, what we're seeing these days is much more pointy little tips on the end of your full chisel chain. But certainly a lot of professionals are using full chisel chains so that they've got that extra aggressive tooth on there, which will cut through the tree a lot more. If you're certainly cutting firewood, and semi-chisel's going to get you out of trouble 9 times out of 10. Personally, I use both, but I really do like full chisel. I really do like C85 X-Cut from Husqvarna, and I certainly like Hexa. So those two profiles are very aggressive. I have filed a bit of square ground. I'm not the world's best filer. However, when I'd done time-based cutting on my square ground, it cut really well. It is time consuming. If you do square ground, you need a different file. You need a hexagonal type file, totally different than a round file. So lastly this is what we refer as semi-chisel, which is round ground with a rounded corner on it. Full chisel, round ground with a square corner on it. That's the difference. Round corner versus square corner. And the semi-chisel is slower. I hope the video has helped, especially for those people that are getting into it. Look, do yourself a favour. Make sure that you get yourself one of those file holders, because every single person that files will get off track eventually. It's something that happens. By using this, the file is held in the correct position, and you'll be guaranteed that you'll reset that height back to the correct. Look, these don't cost much at all, right? They don't cost much at all, and it just means that it will reset the height to the correct height, and it means that your cutting performance should be as best as possible if you hold the file within the 30-degree mark as indicated on here. 30 degrees left and right. There we go. There it is. So that can really make an improvement and put you back on track if you get off track. Only one other thing to mention lastly before we go, make sure that you use a raker gauge of some description. I tend not to use these, but I use the windows. If you want to check, you can see where it's got 30 degrees on there. You can place that on top of your chain, look through that window to make sure that you file at 30 degrees. This is suitable for 1/4 inch chain, 3/8 chain, 0.325 and 3/8 picot. Also on the side, you've got these little side windows there, and what they're used for, especially the 60-degree one, is to make sure that in most cases, if you're filing correctly, you should be within that 60-degree window, right? So this is to check your side plate angle. Should be around 60 degrees, give or take a couple of degrees. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe. Comments are always welcome. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.